A 79-year-old retired Army sergeant walks into a small-town gun show on a quiet Sunday afternoon and notices something half hidden under a dealer's table. A beat-up M1A1 Paratrooper Carbine with a snapped wire stock, a rust-pitted receiver, and a barrel so corroded the rifling looks like sandpaper. 3 younger gunsmiths standing nearby have already inspected it. They've already laughed. They've already told the dealer it is good for parts and nothing else. $200 for that pile of rust, one of them sneered as the old man walked past. You'd get more out of it melting it down for fishing weights. The old man did not turn his head. He stopped. He looked down, and he went very still. He knelt, slowly, painfully, the way men kneel when their knees remember every cold winter they have ever survived, and lifted the carbine off the table. He turned it over in his hands the way a man holds something he has not seen in 50 years. He ran his thumb along the underside of the receiver, found a tiny inspector's mark stamped beneath the wood line, and his eyes filled with tears he did not let fall. He paid the dealer in cash. He did not haggle. He did not even flinch when one of the young gunsmiths chuckled behind him and muttered that he had just wasted $200 on scrap metal. If you believe that a rifle which jumped into Normandy still deserves to be called a rifle, not junk, not parts, not scrap, type the word honour in the comments right now before this story goes any further, because what this old soldier did over the next 7 days is going to remind you why we do not throw away the things that fought for us. The old veteran's name was Walter Hayes. He had served 26 years in the United States Army, retiring as a master sergeant in 1991. Most of his neighbours in the small Pennsylvania town where he lived knew him as the quiet old man who walked his beagle every morning at 6 and tipped his cap to anyone who passed him on the sidewalk. They knew his wife had died 4 years ago. They knew he kept a small American flag in his front window that he replaced every Memorial Day. What they did not know, what almost nobody in that town knew, was that Walter Hayes had grown up in the shadow of a man named Thomas Hayes, his uncle, a paratrooper of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who had jumped into Normandy on the night of June 5th, 1944, and had never come home. Walter had been 4 years old when the telegram arrived at his grandmother's farmhouse. He had grown up looking at the photograph on her mantel, a thin, smiling boy in a leather jump helmet, holding a folding Stock M1A1 carbine across his chest. His grandmother had told him more than once that Thomas had named that carbine Maggie after her, his mother. She had told him the serial number was written in pencil on the inside cover of his uncle's jump diary, which she kept wrapped in a square of cotton inside a cedar box upstairs. She had told him, when he was 10 years old and sitting on her porch chewing the end of a piece of straw, that one day somehow he might find that rifle again. Walter had not believed her, not for 69 years. The gun show was held in a converted livestock auction barn on the edge of town, the kind of place where the floorboards still smelled faintly of hay, even though the cattle had been gone since 1978. Walter went every spring. He never bought anything. He liked the smell of gun oil and old wood, and the sound of men talking quietly about things their wives had stopped pretending to understand. The dealer with the rusted carbine was a heavy-set man with a sunburned neck who had bought a storage unit at auction and was trying to unload its contents before his wife found out how much he had paid. The 3 young gunsmiths worked at a custom shop 2 counties over. They were good at what they did, and they knew it. They had spent the morning teasing the dealer about the carbine, telling him the receiver was probably cracked under the rust, telling him the barrel could not be saved, telling him a complete restoration would cost 6 times what the rifle would ever be worth even when finished. The dealer had begun to believe them. He was about to drop the price to $150 when Walter walked over. $200, Walter said. He did not look up from the carbine. His voice was soft, almost apologetic, the way old men's voices become when they have spent decades giving orders and have decided they no longer need to raise them. The dealer blinked. "You sure, friend?" Those fellas there said, "I heard what they said." The youngest of the 3 gunsmiths, a man of maybe 28 with a beard like a wire brush, leaned against the next table over and grinned. "Sir, I'm telling you, that thing is gone. The barrel's pitted clean through. You're going to crack the receiver the second you try to clean it. That's a paperweight in about a week." Walter counted out $200 in 20s, laid them on the table, and lifted the carbine into the crook of his arm. He turned and looked the young gunsmith in the eyes for the first time. "Son," he said, "I've been carrying broken things home for longer than you have been alive. This one is going to be fine." He walked out of the barn into the late afternoon sun with the carbine wrapped in a piece of canvas he had brought for exactly that purpose. Behind him, the three gunsmiths laughed, and one of them said, loudly enough to be sure Walter heard, that if the old man got that thing to fire even one round, he would eat his own apron. Walter Hayes had a workbench in his basement that had not been used in 11 years, since his wife had stopped him from working on the lawnmower because his hands were shaking too badly. His hands were not shaking now. He laid the carbine on a folded towel beneath the bench light, and he looked at it for a long time before he touched it. He took the rifle apart slowly, piece by piece, naming each part out loud the way he had been taught to do at Fort Benning in 1965, when his drill sergeant told him a soldier who could not name his weapon in the dark could not be trusted with it in the light. Bolt, operating slide, recoil plate, trigger housing, sear, hammer. He soaked the receiver overnight in a solution of distilled water and electrolytic rust removal, the same method the National Park Service used on artifacts pulled from sunken battleships. He hand-lapped the barrel for 3 evenings with progressively finer compounds, working until the rifling came back from the dead like a face slowly emerging from fog. He soldered the snapped wire stock back together with a silver alloy he had to drive 40 miles to buy. He stripped the wood handguard and refinished it with 3 coats of boiled linseed oil, rubbed in by hand 12 hours apart. And on the 4th night, when the receiver was clean enough to read, he held it under a magnifying lamp and he found the serial number. He went upstairs. He climbed the 2nd flight to the attic. He opened the cedar box his grandmother had left him in 1979, and which he had not opened since the day of her funeral. He took out the cotton-wrapped diary. He turned to the inside cover. He compared the number written there in his uncle's careful pencil hand to the number stamped on the receiver in his own. They matched. Walter Hayes sat down on the attic floor in the dark and wept for the first time since his wife had died. 7 days after the gun show, Walter walked into the custom gun shop 2 counties over with the carbine in a soft leather case slung over his shoulder. The 3 gunsmiths were behind the counter. The youngest one, the one with the wire-brush beard, looked up and his grin started to form before he recognized who had walked in. The grin faded. Walter set the case on the counter and unzipped it. He lifted the carbine out and laid it on the glass. The wire stock was straight. The receiver was clean and lightly oiled. The wood was the colour of dark honey. The barrel, when the youngest gunsmith leaned forward to look down it, was bright. He cycled the action. The bolt slid home with a sound none of them had ever heard before from a rifle that had been left to rot for 60 years. The shop went quiet. The oldest of the 3 gunsmiths, a man in his 40s who had said almost nothing at the show, picked the carbine up with both hands and looked at Walter the way a man looks at someone he has badly misjudged. "Sir," he said, "how did you—" "Look under the receiver," Walter said, "where the wood meets the metal. There is an inspector's mark there. Tell me what it says." The young gunsmith with the beard turned the rifle over. He held it under the bench lamp. He squinted. "It says IPB and a number, 441. He looked up. "What does that mean?" Walter's voice was very quiet. "IPB stands for Irwin Peterson Battery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That stamp means this rifle was inspected on the 41st day of production in the spring of 1944. There were less than 140 M1A1 carbines that came out of that line that month. Most of them went to the 82nd Airborne. They were issued at Camp Quorn in England in May of 1944 to the men of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment who jumped into France on the night of June 5th. The shop had gone so quiet that Walter could hear the hum of the fluorescent light over the counter. "This one," he said, and he laid his hand flat on the receiver, was issued to a 19-year-old private named Thomas Hayes. He carried it strapped across his chest in a padded jump bag. He came down through anti-aircraft fire over a town called Sainte-Mère-Église at about 1:15 in the morning. He landed in an apple orchard about a mile from his drop zone alone, and he held a crossroads with this rifle and a bag of grenades for 9 hours, until elements of his company linked up with him at sunrise. He was killed 2 days later, on June 8th, by mortar fire near the village of Neuville-au-Plain. The rifle was recovered by a sergeant in his platoon and turned in. After the war it was sold as surplus. It changed hands at least 4 times that I've been able to trace. The last owner died in 2019 and his children sold his collection to a storage unit, which was auctioned and bought by the man who sold it to me last Sunday for $200. Walter looked up. His eyes were dry now. "Thomas Hayes was my uncle. My grandmother told me when I was 10 that I would find this rifle again. I did not believe her. I am 80 years old next month and I still do not know how she knew. But she was right. Nobody spoke. The young gunsmith with the beard set the rifle down on the glass counter as carefully as if it were a sleeping child. He took a step back. He looked at his own hands. His face had gone a colour that was not quite white and not quite grey, and his throat was working, but no sound was coming out. The oldest gunsmith pulled off his apron, folded it once, and laid it on the counter beside the rifle. "I owe you an apology, sir," he said. "We all do." Walter shook his head. "You owe me nothing. You did not know. Nobody knew." He picked up the carbine. He slid it back into its case. The youngest gunsmith finally found his voice. "Sir," he said, would you let us take a photograph of it? For the wall. We have a wall in the back where we put pictures of rifles that meant something. We would like to put yours up, if you would let us." Walter thought about it. He nodded once. He let them take the photograph. He let them shake his hand, all three of them, and he let the oldest one walk him out to his truck. Before he closed the door, the oldest gunsmith said very quietly, "Master Sergeant Hayes, thank you for your service, and for his." Walter touched the brim of his cap. He drove home. The carbine hangs now above the mantel in Walter Hayes's living room, in a glass case he built himself from cherry wood salvaged from his grandmother's old barn. Beneath it is a small brass plate with two names engraved on it, Thomas Hayes and Margaret Hayes, and a date, June 5th, 1944. The diary sits in the case beside the rifle, open to the page where the serial number is written. Every June 5th, Walter takes the carbine down, cleans it with a soft cloth, cycles the action 3 times the way his uncle was taught to do before a jump, and puts it back. The young gunsmith with the wire brush beard drives down from 2 counties over every spring, and he brings his son, who is 6, and the boy stands in front of the case and reads the names out loud. Some rifles are tools, some are scrap, and some are time machines that earned the right to fly home alive no matter how long it took them, no matter how many hands they passed through, no matter how many people walked past them and saw nothing. The men who carried them fought to come home. The least we can do when one of them finally makes it back is recognize the uniform underneath the rust. If this story moved you, if you believe that no veteran and no veteran's rifle should ever be written off as scrap by people who never stood where they stood, subscribe to this channel right now. We tell these stories because they deserve to be told, and because somewhere out there on a dealer's table under a sheet of canvas, another piece of history is waiting for the one person in the room who still knows how to look. Be that person. And the next time you walk past an old man with quiet hands, remember Walter Hayes. Remember Thomas. And remember that the things this country owes its soldiers do not have an expiration date.